quote-unquote Muslim, Punjabi, Pakistani, Canadian woman, i.e. also South Asian in a Canadian brand, I guess. Right? We call ourselves South Asian, but we're vastly diverse. So solidarity to my South Asian sisters and brothers who are here as injured workers. I am a daughter, a mother, a sibling of individuals with disabilities, an activist and advocate, a systems disruptor, a social entrepreneur, and I happen to have a disability. I'm blind. So if you don't talk, you don't exist in my world. And that means for my deaf friends, they have to come and touch me. They're the only ones allowed to touch me, okay? So I am here as National Director of Disability Without Poverty. We built a grassroots movement from C to C to C when the federal government promised the Canada Disability Benefit in 2020. Today, the Canada Disability Benefit is law, is budgeted, is regulated, and is going to roll out on July the 1st, and it's too little for too few. It just ain't good enough. They didn't listen to us. So we need to speak louder and clearer. Yes, we work together and change the system in a nonpartisan way, galvanizing all party support. We continue to work with that spirit of mobilizing all party support. We are nonpartisan. We are not funded by government. Let me make it clear, we are not funded by government. We are funded by philanthropy who believe in doing good and believe in doing right by disabled people in this country. And the reason we are here today is to show solidarity with our sisters and brothers who are injured workers and advocating for injured workers. We have a common goal around social justice. We need to build bridges of understanding amongst us. The system insists on dividing us by giving us different labels. Like, you know, the workers, like WSIB, right? They categorize us in different categories, like ODSP, and we divide each other by the label that we carry. It doesn't matter if we were born with a disability or acquired it. It doesn't matter how we acquired it, whether it was an accident or illness. What matters is we share common language, share common barriers, and work together to eliminate those barriers. So our brothers and sisters, our injured workers, who meet the income thresholds and meet eligibility criteria riddled with barriers will be accessing the Canada Disability Benefit up to $200 per month, rolling out July 1st. You have to qualify for the disability tax credit, another barrier. A disability tax credit that needs medical forms. We are advocating, saying, hey, if people qualify already through rigorous medical assessments for WSIB, for ODSP, for any other program in this country where they've had to attest to their disability and go to a doctor to prove it by filling out forms, they shouldn't have to prove it again and again and again. I am blind, I am blind, I am blind, and I need no doctor to certify that. I just can't see you. Get it with the program. Okay? So, solidarity, folks, that's the way to change the system. Nothing about us without us. Let's stand together. We just wrapped up National Accessibility Week, and here we are standing in solidarity with International Injured Workers Day and celebrating the fact that it's been recognized in Ontario, commemorating the fact that we have lost so many lives in this pursuit of social justice, and the battle will continue. Together only can we change the system. Thank you.
We would now like to invite Andy Ladesser to speak about occupational disease. Andy Ladesser is the United Steelworkers District 6 Health, Safety and Environment Coordinator covering Ontario and the Atlantic provinces. Andy has represented injured workers at all levels of the compensation process. The bulk of Andy's advocacy and representation was focused on occupational disease.
I'm an injured worker as well, and as much as I've changed roles, the advocate still exists to me. I'm still here to speak up for injured workers. I thank you for the opportunity to talk about occupational disease, because injured work... Sorry. Okay. Injured workers naturally includes victims of occupational disease, those who have suffered from or have died from injured workers. They're part of this day. Many of them couldn't be here, but this is an important topic. And occupational disease isn't new for the workers' compensation system. It's been around since its inception. At that time, it was referred to as industrial disease. And in fact, industrial disease existed hundreds of years before there was workers' compensation. In his final report on workers' compensation laws, Sir William Ralph Meredith stated that it would be a blot on the system if victims of occupational disease weren't afforded the same benefits as every other injured worker. And I'm here to tell you, the WSIB has created many blots on that system, the way they deal with victims of occupational disease. The problem isn't the legislation, but the administration of the Act, the managers and those above at WSIB. It's clearly stated in the Act that occupational disease will be adjudicated just like every other injury, like Meredith envisioned. Some occupational diseases are covered by presumptive legislation. There's 31 diseases in Schedule 3 that are afforded the presumption that it's work-related unless the contrary is shown. There's 4 in Schedule 4 that have no rebuttal regarding work-relatedness. The benefit of the doubt is prescribed by the Act, which means that if the evidence on an issue is equal in weight or approximately equal in weight, they're supposed to decide in favor of the worker. When you combine that with the rule of liberal interpretation prescribed by the Legislation Act, clearly there is room for improvement in legislation, but it's not the problem. WSIB is mandated to monitor generally accepted advances in scientific information and have those reflected in services and benefits. Have they done that? No. Yet despite that mandate, experts have estimated there's 3,000 occupational cancers diagnosed in Ontario every year, and only about 15% of that is reported to the WSIB. Of those cancers reported, excluding presumptive cancers for firefighters, less than half are allowed. So that's 85% of estimated occupational cancers that never get reported to WSIB, and less than half of the 15% that's reported are allowed. Clearly a lot of work to be done in reporting and in adjudicating. Last year, WSIB allowed 210 fatal claims. 210 workers died. And out of that, 140 of those deaths were from occupational disease. So we have a small reported number of cancers and a large number of deaths. So that tells you that the state of the problem is much larger than we know, and far too many workers and retirees aren't getting the benefits that they should be entitled to receive. WSIB also has the authority, subject to the approval of the General Governing Council, to add diseases to Schedule 3 and 4. Now they did that once, even though they had that authority for decades. They added Parkinson's disease and related to McIntyre powder, aluminum dust, thanks to a lot of hard work from Janice Martel. And it sounds like they're doing something good, but they were actually reversing a policy that they had in place since 1997 that was not authorized by the Act. That policy directed adjudicators to simply deny those claims. The Act requires every decision be made on its merits and justice. The WSIB has the mandate to administer the Act. The very agency that's in charge of administering the Act was failing in that duty and failing with impunity. This was not the only time WSIB violated the Act. They had a practice of offsetting permanent impairment awards in chronic obstructive pulmonary disease cases if the person was a smoker. So the Act clearly states that the WSIB has to use the American Medical Association guides when determining someone's permanent impairment. They don't get to make up the rules, write their little binder, and deduct, but they did that for years. So any adjustments that they were making, they had to follow the AMA guidelines, and they failed to do that. In 2016, some decisions came out of the tribunal on that very subject and seemed to settle the issue, because they all said, no, it's wrong. Well, the majority said. Now, I was involved in some of those decisions, and I can tell you one came out at the same time as two came out saying, no, you can't do it. One said you can. I had the opportunity to talk about that one before they made a decision. And I simply said, just because the previous decision came out agreeing with the board doesn't mean that it was the rep's job to tell the tribunal they have to make a decision consistent with the Act. Now that I've done that in that appeal, that panel could have ignored it, and they agreed. And I can tell you the other decision was overturned on reconsideration. But the problem didn't end there. WSIB drew a line in the sand. They said, if you didn't get your decision before April, if you got your decision before April 16, 2020, and you didn't object, we're going to keep that money. There's no reason in law for them to keep that money. They just drew that artificial line in the sand, and they are still keeping money away from injured workers that deserve it. I've seen other lots, and I'll just briefly cover a couple. There's too many, I could be here all day. One I saw was a hygienist in his assessment at the WSIB made a statement that had absolutely no evidence to support it. There was evidence to the contrary on file. And it wasn't until it got to the tribunal that the panel there said what the WSIB occupational hygienist had put in that file was speculative. That's the polite way of saying it was a lie. It was based on no evidence. In another appeal, WSIB had their own scientific review about kidney cancer. And as much as I say cancer is fatal, kidney cancer has a high survival rate. Their scientific paper focused on mortality rates, and they were denying claims on that basis. And when it got in front of a tribunal medical assessor, he made it clear that what the WSIB was doing was wrong. You should not rely on mortality rates to deny claims, because that doesn't prove the risk of getting it from work. And that worker was successful, but far too many others have had their claims denied because of WSIB paperwork. Okay. So there needs to be real change for victims of occupational disease. We need people with a genuine understanding of the proper legal test for entitlement, not just using the terms to incorrectly deny claims. And the list of presumptive diseases needs to be greatly expanded. Cumulative effect, combined exposure, and individual susceptibility need to be considered. Workers deserve a compensation system that is fair and just, and they deserve it now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andy. Andy is an incredible advocate. I've admired his work over many years. I want now to ask you to join me in a little chant. Workers' compensation is a right. We will not give up the fight. Workers' comp 42nd Injured Workers' Day, and the first to be officially proclaimed in the province. Its future is already at risk because the City of Toronto recently passed a bylaw that could deeply and dangerously restrict our right to gather in public spaces like we are today. Here today to speak about this is Howard Green from the Coalition of Charter Rights. Howard's lived and worked all over the country and has both been a worker and activist on issues relating to education and Indigenous people, among many other things. Howard, nice to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for the invitation to speak. It's pretty humbling to come up now after all of these amazing speeches by workers and injured worker protectors and labor unions. So what I have to talk about is something a little bit different, but it relates, and it has to do with a recent bylaw that was passed by the City of Toronto on May 22nd that was ostensibly to protect social institutions like places of worship, childcare, and schools, of which there are in the City of Toronto 3,000 of these institutions. And what they place as a bylaw is that it will create bubble zones in which it will restrict protest around these institutions. And it passed by a vote of 16-9. And it will infringe on our Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Absolutely, a freedom of expression and our freedom of assembly. This bylaw passed despite fierce community opposition from labor groups, workers, non-government organizations, civil liberties groups, progressive Jewish and Palestinian organizations across the city who came together for a coalition for Charter of Rights, and we fought for those rights. And Bonnie Heath, who's part of that coalition from injured workers and others, joined together with us to fight this bylaw. So how could a threat like this happen in the City of Toronto? A threat to our right to protest. As Canadians, we hold the Charter of Rights and Freedoms as dear. And unlike those in the South, we don't believe about challenging our democracy and authoritarian rule. That is a slippery slope, as we see Mr. Trump operate every day. Toronto has been a center for protest for decades. You have been leading many of these protests over the years to fight for worker rights, against racism, against environmental challenges, and a whole bunch of other issues that demand challenging the wealthy and the powerful. No bylaw has ever been passed to curtail these actions. Yet, over the last 18 months in the City of Toronto, as you may know, there have been a number of peaceful protests in favor of pro-Palestinian liberation and against Israeli genocide. These have created inconveniences, yes. They have created uncomfortability, yes. But they have not been subject to any arrests, and no violation of hate speech has ever been charged against any protester. Despite this fact, the City Council last December directed people in its bureaucracy to develop a bylaw to limit these demonstrations, despite the fact that no bylaw, no protest had ever prevented anyone from accessing any of these institutions. So why did they do it? One, it was unnecessary. The police already have the power to protect institutions. You don't need another bylaw to do this. Two, it was undemocratic. 86% of Torontonians who were consulted said no to a bylaw. It's unenforceable. They have bylaw officers who will be going around trying to figure out how to charge people for crimes that are things like booing or shaming people for going into institutions that could be selling land on Palestinian land. Shame. And of course, most importantly, for us, as the charter protectors, the city's top lawyer said this bylaw is not likely to stand up in court if it's ever challenged. Yet, City Council passed it. So what does this thing mean to us? It's going to create a bubble zone around these institutions of 50 meters. Access zones, they call them, of which peaceful protests on July 2nd will be under scrutiny. within these bylaw areas or these access zone areas. You can be fined up to $5,000 for an act of discouragement. But I don't know, no one knows what an act of discouragement really is. It could be shaking your head. It could be booing someone. It could be saying you're against genocide. What is an act of discouragement? Anyway, we're saying it's probably unenforceable. So really, why did the city of Toronto do this? 9 city councilors voted against, 16 voted for. The idea being maybe they considered voting against it that they would be supporting hate. Maybe they voted against it because they would be supporting intimidation. Maybe they voted against it because they were insensitive to the fear and emotions that people have. But most importantly, some people voted for it because they were afraid of being considered anti-Semitic, for voting against something that would support people's access to institutions. As Councillor Matlow said, the opposition to the bylaw, I could not support a performative measure that would do nothing to keep us safe and would do nothing at all that would be able to be protected by the courts. So we agree we need to stop hate crimes. We need to stop racism. We need to stop prejudice against Jews and Muslims and other people. But this bylaw only does one thing. It prevents and infringes on your charter rights to protest. So over the course of the next months or so, we will be looking at ways to challenge this bylaw legally in court. We will be communicating with people within our coalition of over 110 organizations in the city. But one of the things that's most important about this bylaw, it creates a chill about protests. You could be fined for protesting by a bylaw officer within 50 meters of an institution that is doing things that you may not agree with. And that is, in fact, a very slippery slope on our rights to protest. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We have one more thing left to do today, which is enjoy the music of the Justice Singers. The Justice Singers are a collection of injured workers coordinated by Kate Lushington. They have performed their original songs at rallies for over a decade, and we are delighted to have them here today. Thank you.
Hello, we are so excited to be finally able to sing for you. And I'm going to invite Heather Sharon Van Adsigan, is one of the founding members of the Justice Singers, to the microphone, and Alicia, who has recently joined us but is a great advocate for migrant workers. And we are going to sing. The choir was formed by Beryl Brown, who is the most marvelous injured worker advocate who sadly is not well enough to be with us now. But we're going to sing one song by Beryl, one song by Heather, and a special guest appearance by Alicia. So this is your mic.
Final chant. The letter is over there. The justice for injured workers.
All of our allies and partners, it's been very special. You've all been wonderful. We started with that sun, and you've stayed through with the clouds and the cold moving in. Solidarity to all of us. Join our fight and join the fights of all of our allies as well. I love you all. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.